welcome back to a2b Perspectives, the podcast where we discuss how video games change and affect our lives. I am Daisy from the YouTube channel Amdrag. I am here with Damian from the YouTube channel Beyond Brainwaves about language and learning, and I'm here with Two Dens from the channel Two Dens, actually dedicated and genuinely about video games. Definitely the most qualified individual here at the moment. So thank you for joining us today. We are going to be discussing the fighting game genre, our favorites, our introduction to it, and how it has touched our hearts and impacted our lives. So with that said, let's roll the intro. Okay, so we'll start with Damian. You recommended this topic to us. This was your idea, so I think it's only fair that you start us off and tell us a little bit about what got you, my Greek friend, into fighting video games.
Yeah, so first of all, I kind of had the idea because I think you also mentioned in one of our past episodes that you were really into fighting games and into the fighting game community. Maybe
sure
it was in the first episode that we talked about. So be sure to check that out also in case you haven't already. But yeah, like for me, the fighting game, the FGC, the fighting game community is something very important to me. I used to really be into that as well. I've kind of fallen off, but I can explain that more. So basically everything starts like the first fighting game I was introduced actually was like Mortal Kombat on the Xbox 360. I don't remember. I think it was the 9th one. It was like a friend of mine had it, and I used to like visit his place, and then we used to play a bit. And I thought it was fine, but I never really got that much into fighting games through that.
I'm curious too. You're starting with Mortal Kombat, and Mortal Kombat's known for its violence and brutality. So I kind of wonder, in your household, did you have any limitations on like violent media or anything like that? Like, did it get to be something of a I don't know. We have taboo experiences at friends' houses and at sleepovers. I'm wondering if this is one of them.
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. It was kind of taboo, but my parents are not so strict about it. Like, especially with my dad, who's pretty religious, we used to watch very violent films, like action films, war films, and stuff like that. But even though he's like very religious, so, obviously it would be frowned upon, and I was never really drawn to mindless violence or stuff like that, or like very violent things. But
I just feel like the first time you see a head get ripped off in a video game could be a formative moment.
I guess, but I think at the time it just wasn't. I think at that time I had already watched like Happy Tree Friends on YouTube and worse than that on the internet.
I don't
know, like
this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it, especially with my experience working in schools with kids and seeing, what kids are exposed to and how they kind of deal with what those things are. When it comes to like ridiculous violence, we're talking Mortal Kombat. I would define as like ridiculous cartoon violence, right?
Yeah, it's silly.
I find like, and I've got a son, so I have to think about this. I find that kind of like hyper violence, that kind of like video game cartoon violence, isn't as much of a concern for me for how like kids would interpret it and internalize it as it is honestly like Call of Duty games. Like I feel like the act of like, a first person shooter holding a gun, especially if you are fighting like other humans, I feel like that is more concerning than like Mortal Kombat like ripping someone's spine out, because it's just such an absurd thing that's happening. So,
I thought about that recently too, as also a parent. The last Mortal Kombat 1 came out, and I decided that would be the one that I would share with my kids. And it was very, very interesting to like, see their reactions, because it wasn't, for instance, like we watched Hunter x Hunter not long ago, where some really heavy stuff happens, and there is big violence, but there's a lot of like really like strong emotional moments, and those are more like upsetting and more difficult to process than like seeing a man split in half by the pigtails or whatever. Yeah. So it is kind of an interesting line. We draw some weird lines in American culture, and that's kind of that's a little bit why I was curious about it. But so I mean, you're at your friend's house and you're checking out Mortal Kombat for the first time, and it's not doing much for you.
Yeah, before I get into that, I wanted to like respond to what Luke Tuden said, that like about Call of Duty, like maybe being worse. I actually, like, according to my experience, I kind of agree with that, because I think the main connection is that when you play Call of Duty, or even to some extent, I would say like GTA, that it gamifies or glorifies like something bad that you can actually kind of do in real life.
Right.
That
Totally
the game real life, connection becomes closer, or the limits are blurred. And so, like, I've actually never met someone, who's doing fighting games and he's like brutal and he wants to beat up people for no reason whatsoever. But I have met people that were really into first-person shooters, and they wanted to go to the military to shoot people and stuff like that. So I think I think Call of Duty is probably the best military like conscription advertisement there is. Like nothing.
I would agree that it's an advertisement. I would definitely agree.
You're absolutely right. And the FGC, the fighting game community, I know we're going to talk about this more, but is notoriously like accepting and like kind and kind of like wholesome, typically like very queer coded and oriented. There are a lot of queer people who are very drawn towards the fighting game community and are like really, really good at fighting games. Figures like Sonic Fox, I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah.
But it's a very different thing. It is funny because these games are literally about like, beating somebody up, and even in cases like Mortal Kombat where you're ending with fatalities and stuff like that. But there's no real world analog for that, and I do think it creates a pocket dimension of cartoon violence.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but to get like back to the story, I was introduced to it. I didn't think much about it. It was like fun, kind of like as a in-between thing. I think for most people that aren't interested in fighting games, they probably have a similar experience that I had with that. Later on, like when I got into retro video game collecting, I also bought the first 2 Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo, where I think on the Super Nintendo, it was only the second one where you could enter a code and then it would have the blood and everything. But
it was sweat. It was everybody just dumping out gallons of greasy gray sweat.
Yeah. But then there was a code to have blood, but just in the second one.
But even when they would add it, like, they did a good job with the art and you could tell what it was, but it's still like just a blotch of red on a pixelated character,
Yeah.
And a body would explode into like a firework explosion of skulls and rib cages.
Yeah. Or pull out the head with the spine and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, then I kind of moved on, never thought about fighting games again. But then I saw that Smash Bros. Brawl came out, and I had the Wii, but actually I was like with my aunt at the time, and she like forbid me because she saw that there was game violence on this game.
Wow.
And then she told my parents that, that I shouldn't buy this game at all. So it would be like a few years later that I would just kind of order it myself on eBay, which also kind of sucked because I actually ordered by accident, because I was super young, the NTSC version, so the American version, and I couldn't play it on my Wii, which was region locked and European, obviously. But then I really enjoyed it, and I had friends come over, but still, I wouldn't say that I really had the fighting game experience. It was more like a party game, but I didn't get that deeply into mechanics. And I think this is something we can further discuss, and I would be stoked to hear what you guys have to say about that. When something is really, really a fighting game or more of a party game, because I think, students, you're probably going to talk also more about that, where the limits between those two things are. But even that didn't get me that much into the FGC. I think I did look up tier lists for the first time, and I used to be a Marth main also on Brawl and stuff like that. And then
so you're aware of how broken Meta Knight was, and was Meta Knight banned in your circles? Yeah.
No, because I was the only guy who had Brawl that I ever knew.
Fair enough.
Most people around me, like especially in Greece at the time, if you had a Wii, you only had like Mario or kid-friendly stuff. But most guys my age would have an PS3 or Xbox 360 and play like Call of Duty or GTA. And
got it. That makes sense.
So, I think your perspective is so important and probably really interesting to a lot of our listeners. And so I'd really like to provide the little extra context. This is Brawl coming out. You're playing Brawl. Brawl was slapped with the dreaded T rating. I don't know if you remember that, Tudens. I don't know what it was in Europe, but Brawl was rated T for teen, which was like kind of a surprise at the time. And I think it might have something to do with Wario farting. But I'd like to know, how old were you, Damian, when Brawl came out and you're playing this with your friends? You said you were very young.
Question.
Were you a T for teen?
Yeah, I think I was must have been like around 10 to 12 at the time.
Wow. Okay. So there's quite the age gap, as always. But that's really interesting to hear. When you said that was your first Smash Brothers, it really because you missed Melee. And I'd love to hear if you ended up playing Melee. But when we have the party versus fighting game debate, Melee is the perfect thing to point at, because Melee accidentally was an extraordinarily competent fighting game. And I don't know if you went down the mythos of the Melee gods and all that stuff. It's some of the most interesting things that have ever happened in Smash Brothers. But that game is forever competitive. People discover new tech in it all the time. It's really like a genuinely great, brilliant, competitive fighting game. But Masahiro Sakurai and Nintendo will swear up and down, it's hardly a fighting game at all. It's just a party game.
And I'm gonna talk about that now, because I totally agree. Is it like do you have characters that you fight with, and there are different attacks and stuff like you can do? Yeah, it's on a 2D plane, but Smash Bros. As a whole, it doesn't really have what you traditionally think of as combos, right? You don't have to put in multiple different inputs to do a specific move, whereas most other fighting games do. Now, there are there are different moves you can put together to string to get, to have a strategy, but when you're talking about executing a specific move, and you have to put in 5 different inputs in order to do that, Smash Bros. Doesn't have that at all. Every attack is one, it's one simultaneous input. It might be more than one button, or it might be a directional and a button. Whereas other fighting games, you're gonna go up A, side B, down X, whatever, and then you'll do a move. And Smash Bros. Doesn't have that. Smash Bros. Is more for those kind of, Melee had 4 players, right? Did Brawl have more than? I don't think Brawl had more than 4 players. I think Brawl was still 4-player. But then you get into Smash Bros. 3D and Smash Bros. Wii U, and then you get into obviously Ultimate, and you're having 8, and then you're having I think we have what can Ultimate do? Does anyone know? Is it still 8 or? I think it's higher than that.
Is it still 8? I don't know. It's definitely a really high number. But what's interesting, Tudens, is that while, first of all, this is a little nitpicky, but in Smash Ultimate, there actually are traditional special moves.
Are there?
And so the point of there are, so Terry has them, Ryu has them, Ken has them,
because they came from those games.
Exactly, Tekken Boy has them. But what's interesting, and this is something that I think is really worth talking about, is that when you talk about the skill ceiling of fighting games, the command inputs, which is what you're talking about to do special moves, those are intentionally skill based. And so the point is that a more difficult one might be a more effective or more powerful move. And so when they adapted this into Smash Brothers, they actually did, it's not just a fun quirk, but if you do the motion input for Ken's fireball, it does more damage. It is a better fireball.
Interesting.
But another point that I think is really worth pointing out, because if you're not keeping up with modern fighting games, Street Fighter 6 launched with simple controls, where you could map, I don't even think you had to map them, but you can basically choose for your special moves to be holding up and pressing the special move button, holding right and pressing the special move button. Mm-hmm. And if you play with these controls, you're limited in your ceiling, there's certain things that you just cannot execute. But at least in the very early days of Street Fighter 6, there were actually a lot of, especially Japanese players, who were playing with simplified controls, especially for characters like Zangief. And when they did this, these are still top tier great fighting game players still playing like the most prestigious fighting game in the world, but they're doing so with simplified controls that really mirror Super Smash Brothers. And to extend it just one step further, there are modern fighters coming out today and coming out soon where that is the default, where now those are the inputs for their special moves. And it's going to be contentious in the community, especially to not drone on too much. But in the community, we have what's called a hitbox controller, which is leverless. So there's no joystick on it. So it's just button inputs to like do your moves. And so it reduces everything that you do in the game to basic button inputs. And so things that used to be difficult, like for instance, charging up a guile, boom attack where you're holding back and then pressing forward. Now that thing is like, it's as simplified as doing any other move in the game. And like for a little while, having a hitbox controller broke Guile in Street Fighter V. He was too good if you were playing with the hitbox controller.
Interesting.
And so while all this is discussed right now and is still going on, I do think that it cracks your argument about like party game versus fighting game a little bit.
So then, what?
So
okay,
something that I want to mention is also that there are like technically combos that like the Ken combo, like even back in Melee and Brawl, that existed like on
Melee?
Smash Bros. So there are like combo chains.
Right, combo chains. Combo chains.
Yeah.
But I was talking about like specific like multi-step inputs to do a specific move. Which, by the way, audience, I'm not very experienced with fighting games. If you can already tell, I know a little bit about Super Smash Bros. Melee, and then pretty much nothing else except for what I like to watch Evo once a year when they have the big tournament.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
I'm so stoked we're coming up on that soon. But I think the delineation and language that you're looking for is motion input special moves are not typically featured in Super Smash Brothers, but combos are. And combos have always been in Super Smash Brothers. So I think that may have been the disconnect between you and Damian there as far as combo versus special move inputs.
Yeah,
but Damian, please, we've interrupted you twice now, and it's been really fun every time. It won't be the last, but please continue on your story.
Yeah, I mean that's what it's about, to have a conversation, not to have like monologues or something. But
that's the plan. I mean, getting real comfortable with interrupting you.
Yeah, but yeah, like in the end, like even after Mortal Kombat and Smash Bros, like I still wouldn't have after discovering Smash Bros Brawl. I was introduced for the first time a bit to the FGC, but not that much. And so then, but I think something that is really important that I want to mention about Smash Bros is how it introduces people, especially from my generation, to series, to game franchises like that they might have never heard about. And, especially, even if you have the internet, but you don't have any other friends that are into Nintendo. I was the only kid I ever met, like, growing up. I didn't meet myself, but you know what I mean, who was into Nintendo. So I didn't know anyone else who could tell me about other Nintendo franchises like Fire Emblem and stuff like that, which especially in the West and in Europe was not that famous or popular. So
in fact,
I was introduced to
I don't know about Europe.
I
don't know about Europe, but in the US, we would not have gotten Fire Emblem if it were not for Melee. Melee literally brought us Fire Emblem, and I love Fire Emblem. So I don't know, is that true in Europe?
Same, yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so, that's, I think, something extremely important, and even more with Smash Bros. Ultimate so far. I think Smash Bros. Is probably, I would say, perhaps not my favorite fighting game, but I think probably the most important or the second most important franchise, I would say, of fighting games.
Yeah, I'm betting that we all share that to some extent, because that's we're all coming from a Nintendo background to some level. And when you were saying about introducing you to other things, I think there's the obvious, like Marth and Roy and Melee, but there's also, the trophies. Crack open the single player and collect trophies, and then all of a sudden I know who Doshin the Giant is. That was special. Or Sakopan, or that was very, very cool too. I love that you became, the retro game collector from all this. And I can only imagine that going through those trophies really gave you something to like, oh, I want to play that. I wonder what that's from,
Speaking of the trophies,
sure.
Specifically in Melee, I love Ultimate. It's a really cool game. I think the stickers the spirits pale in comparison to the trophies. I think the trophies,
yeah, for sure,
just so much better.
Yeah.
The trade-off is just that there's so damn many of them,
Correct.
But not being able to have their own entries and stuff like that. Like, I'm not going to say I was disappointed by the spirits, because I've actually gotten like a lot of like longevity out of that feature of that game. And I do enjoy like the themed battles and stuff that you get them. Like, I do like the spirits, but I also miss the trophies. I even miss rearranging them in a diorama. It's kind of funny if you think about it. It's like Amiibo replaced them IRL.
They did.
It's like I now have dioramas with my Amiibo in them.
Well, Amiibo are literally based on the Smash Melee trophies. They're just they're based on them.
It was a genius idea. If only they weren't $30 now.
Yeah.
Something I also really missed is the Subspace Emissary. I think if I remember correctly, it was not like present in Melee. But it was so fun to play with that, also with friends. I think I actually have the best memories from Brawl from the Subspace Emissary. And honestly, I know I'm probably going to get flagged for it, but like Brawl, because it's my introduction to the series, and because of the Subspace Emissary, it's actually my favorite Smash
I think
game.
That's fair. I don't think even the World of Light comes close to Subspace Emissary. I think Subspace Emissary
even though
is just a different level.
When it comes to the mechanics,
I
think it's probably the worst one. It feels like very sluggish and all of that. But it's my
World of Light was bomb too.
World of Light was awesome.
Cool,
I loved World of Light, but I don't think it got close to Emissary.
Well, the cutscenes in Emissary, World of Light had a few of them, but the Subspace Emissary cutscenes and all that was just like, God, that was so much fun. It was really such a reward to just see like Captain Falcon hanging out with Olimar or whatever. And like I did love that stuff being featured more.
So back when Brawl came out, by the way, I looked it up. It's 2008. So however old we were, because I was 17, which was a long time ago. So I didn't like follow trailers back then the way I do now. That kind of started for me in college. Where I would watch E3 every year, and I love E3.
Yeah, for sure. Same.
I miss E3. But I did not know that Sonic the Hedgehog was in Brawl, and I didn't have a Wii at the time. I played it at my friend's house. We played all the way through Subspace Emissary together. I stayed over one night or something. And when we got to Sonic, when Sonic showed up, that was like the hypest moment in a long time for us. Like, that was so cool. And we had no idea it was coming.
Yeah, I really missed that for sure. Yes, the Solid Snake reveal. That was a great trailer, but if you missed that trailer and he was just in the game now, brilliant.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of...
And I mean, I think the Smash, like the new character introduction videos really like became like awesome around the Wii U era.
Definitely.
It was like really an important gaming moment for all of like the entire gaming community, not only the fighting game community.
I still think the single most, I don't think it's the single best reveal I've ever seen. I really like Nintendo Directs and stuff like that. I really miss E3. Those are fun. Game Awards I watch every year. I love the Game Awards.
Same here.
I still think the single best reveal I have ever seen is when at the Game Awards they revealed Joker for Smash Ultimate from Persona 5.
Mm.
I could not believe what I was seeing. It was so incredible.
Yeah.
I really when Luigi fucking died.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They introduced the Castlevania guys.
That was so funny. It was brilliant.
Yeah. We talked about already actually in the first episode.
Oh yeah, we did talk about that. That's right.
Well,
we did.
Yeah, or even I remember some other reveals. I think like the reveal of the game itself with Splatoon. I think it's super iconic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Great moment.
The squid. Yeah.
That was also like peak YouTube reaction territory too. So there were so many like really good videos of people like losing their minds.
Reactions,
like, you know, I was part of that.
Reactions are kind of one of my guilty pleasures. Like I don't get it. Like I understand like what they're doing, right? I just love watching them. They're hilarious. They're hilarious to me. It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Especially Erika. Do you guys know him?
I was just thinking about Erika.
Yeah, rest in peace.
Didn't he? Did he pass away?
Yeah, his reaction to that was really that was some legendary YouTube stuff. I saw that reposted on like Reddit recently, and I was thinking about about all that. I was not following him at the time. So Erika, he I guess YouTube unalived himself some time ago, and it was too bad because he was definitely not in good mental health, but he was a big part of like the Nintendo like oriented like online community, and as far as reaction YouTubers go, that was really his big thing, and that was for sure that big reveal with Splatoon being in Smash Brothers was really significant. I was at work. I was sitting at work, like on my work computer, not working, watching all the reveals and E3 stuff, and good times.
Yeah, but to kind of bring this to stop,
yeah, like blue balling fighting games.
Ball, yeah, to finally,
it's called edging. It's in right now.
Yeah, yeah, but to kind of talk about it, my introduction was actually a video from a YouTuber called Happy Console Gamer. Have you ever heard about him?
I kind of think
It sounds familiar, but I don't know.
Yeah, he's called Johnny Millennium, and he's you can check him out. I don't think he has less than 500k subscribers. I think it must be like somewhere around 300k. But yeah, like it's a YouTuber who like does mainly about gaming. Like he did more about retro gaming, but since then he's done also like the more recent kind of stuff. And he's like kind of old, sorry, but like he's like I think above 50 in age, and so he had a video where he explained when he was like in his early 20s when when Street Fighter 2 the first version came out, and so he talked in this video like basically the early days of the fighting game community, how it used to be like some skater dudes going to the arcades and then like fighting things out in there and stuff like that. And the way he told this story, and by the way, just this channel and how he tells these gaming memories and perspectives is for me like a huge inspiration even for this podcast. And it's really inspired me to see, wow, it can be like this. It was a different kind of competitiveness, I would say, than that what I felt from playing Smash Bros. Or just Mortal Kombat at home. And so then through that, I had already gotten into retro game collecting, and I got Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the SNES. And I also bought like a special joystick controllers that came out, which were actually quite expensive for the SNES, for the SNES, which I think are quite rare. They must probably be worth a lot right now. And then I had I think it was like in summer, and during the summer holidays we would like play all day just Street Fighter and nothing else. Like I had two like best friends at the time, and this was like the main introduction, to learn all the combos, to have your mains, to to get into the different kinds of play styles, right? Because you have more kind of fireball characters, which are more for zoning and controlling the space, and then there's some other characters that are more for mix-ups, so basically trying to read the reactions of the opponent and then do combos on that. And this is what really got me into fighting games. And
I think that's so cool that it's interesting because we talk about our age gap. But still, it's like, you're starting with like playing Mortal Kombat and Brawl or whatever. But when you're actually getting into fighting games, you're coming into the same place that I was when I was 4 years old, and I was not getting into fighting games when I was 4 years old. I was playing Street Fighter, but I was not, I didn't know what I was doing, but that's really very, very cool that you opened that up and exposed to your friends to that and really started to like learn the basics and like the archetypes of what makes a fighting game with what is, it's not the first fighting game, but it kind of is, right? Like Street Fighter 2 really is like the first like fighting game the way that we think about them today. Like that's very, very cool that that's how you got into it.
I think it's also really easy to get other people into it because, like even with people that don't play fighting games, even with my girlfriend, who, didn't used to be as much of a gamer before she met me, we also played a bit of Street Fighter 2 and she kind of enjoyed it. I think it's got like some really special kind of simplicity and depth at the same time that can be really enjoyable. And especially
low bar of entry,
zoning, footsies, it's there. And it's kind of there also in Smash Bros and stuff like that. But I think to a lesser extent. And I think this mind games, reading the opponent, I think this is the moment I got into fighting games. This is what makes something a fighting game to me. And again, I'm not saying this is not present in Mortal Kombat or Smash Bros, but I think especially in the Street Fighter series, there's something really different about it. And so then I got more and more into the Street Fighter series. So I got into, there was a Street Fighter collection on the PS2. I got that. I really got into Street Fighter 2 Alpha and Street Fighter...
Yeah.
The third one of the Alpha series with kind of like a similar system as to the grooves. And then obviously Third Strike. I actually got into Third Strike before I knew about Evo Moment 37. It's 37, right?
Daigo. Yep.
Yeah, Daigo. And then I also bought actually a friend of mine, because I didn't have a console that could run Street Fighter 4, but a friend of I bought for a friend of mine Street Fighter 4 so we could play it at his place, actually, with my own money for him. So, and then we would just play a lot of Street Fighter 4 together. And this is when I really got into the fighting game community, into tier lists, into what's the hub called? I forgot about it. The website.
Oh, event hubs.
Event hubs. Yeah, exactly. And so I used to check these things very often, and obviously the competitive scene, like Daigo, Justin Wong, and kind of like the OG fighting game players. And
sure,
that. And and through that I followed the tournaments, and when there were tournaments, my friends and I would watch them together and stuff like that. And this is like my real introduction into how I really fell in love with the FGC.
No, and Street Fighter 4 was such a great game for the FGC too. It was so interesting. Like I think that was one of the very first times where we really saw major updates for the software and major new character releases and stuff like that come out and affect the meta of the game directly. And it was always very, very exciting to be watching a tournament and you're thinking about who the most common characters are and who everybody picks or who's dominating the meta, and then to see that change. Like in Street Fighter 4, I don't know if you experienced this in your circle, but did you have an Elena controversy when she came out with her healing powers? Because that was a big deal.
Yeah, we didn't for us. It wasn't a controversy because it was just me and a few other friends. We didn't care that much about it, but yeah, I know about it.
Right? Yeah, in the FGC, it was this thing where everybody now had to have a counter pick to Elena. Everybody had to know how to play Elena and how to play against Elena, no matter what your team was or what your comp was, because that was just. It was such a dominant part of the meta. And we see that still to this day. I think now it's become kind of a signature part of fighting games, is that a new character is going to come out and they're going to come out maybe bloated or maybe too good. There was the Leroy stuff that happened in Tekken 7 that was really game breaking, where he was just nobody was better than this Wing Chun guy, and Tekken's not really my game, but it's still you can really keep up with, how the meta shifts and changes every single time there's a new season or a new character introduced. And I don't know, it makes it feel alive. For me, I've talked about it before probably, but I really like pro wrestling, and there's a lot of overlap with pro wrestling and fighting games. There's a lot of there are several pro wrestling moves that are literally just things that a fighting game character did that a pro wrestler saw and said, maybe I can do that in real life. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was wearing my Kenny shirt yesterday. Yeah,
really.
Yeah, he does. Alex says you can't escape, hoists you up on his shoulders, and does the flip over. You know, and he was big on Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5. You know, he was a lot of fun to watch the overlap. And a really good example is there's a pro wrestling move called a Poison Rana, which is a variation on the Hurricane Rana. And the name is likely, this is not 100% guaranteed, but it's likely derived from the Street Fighter character Poison. Because the way that she grabs you, and it's like a Hurricane Rana, but her body is flipped backwards. And so now people start doing this in pro wrestling, and it's called the Poison Rana. And so there's really there's so much overlap to the way that things will grow and the way that characters will persist and the way that there's no off season, the way that it's always happening. Like for me, it tickles the same itch, you know, and it's always like a gateway for me to try and get somebody into one or the other. You know, I have fighting game friends, I have wrestling friends, and I really, you know, that's a grand unifier there. Also, Damian, you knowing who Kenny Omega was just filled my heart.
Yeah. But like the last thing I want to add about wrestling also, I used to be a bit into wrestling, but never so much, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But I think in the FGC, to kind of sell it to people like Lucas and other people that might not be so familiar with it, there are also, or at least when I was really into it, there used to be rivalries, there used to be drama, and there used to be like, you know, like heels, like in the wrestling term, right? Like the antagonists and stuff like that in the FGC, you know, and like all the players also had their distinct personalities. And this is why fighting games are now important, because you can actually express your personality with your play style, with your characters. You can't do it as like when you're playing, I don't know, Super Mario. You know, you can show your character through the way you're playing, but you know, if you're a stoic guy, you can show that in the way that you're playing. But if you're someone who's like very energetic, you can also show that like with your playing style while playing fighting games. And this is why, to me, like fighting games, just like martial arts in general, to me are an art form, because it's a way to express yourself also.
Yeah, absolutely. And the parallels with wrestling on that's the kind of stuff where I could talk about that forever. But I really love, something for me that I get really into is, when I was younger, I was a big personality test person. You know, I liked getting on like Quizilla and whatever and doing all the personality tests and figuring out what kind of a bender I would be if I was in the Avatar universe, that sort of a thing. And it shows in a lot of my hobbies. You know, in pro wrestling, there are distinct styles of pro wrestling. And I love when I introduce friends to it. And, you know, it's a lot of like people who weren't into it before, but they get into it just based on how hyped I am for the events and I'm paying for the pay-per-view, right? And they'll come over and I always want to know, like, who did you like? You know, which style did you like? And there's a big difference between somebody who wrestles a very grounded Greco-Roman looking thing versus somebody who does a lot of flips and a lot of flying or whatever. And then that reads through in fighting games as well. You know, when I'm sitting down and I'm showing somebody new a fighting game, you know, I want to know, you know, who appeals to you. You know, is it the play style? Is it the way that the character looks? And there is this expression that happens when you pick your character and you pick even your color palette or whatever, and you go into a game with like this idea that this is me. I think the fighting game character represents the individual playing them more strongly than other like choosable characters in video games. And there's so much encouragement to engage with experimentation that when you see somebody who is like affectionately attached to a character, especially in the FGC, it is this ultimate underdog endearing thing. A few years ago, IDOM was it was in the very last Evo where they were doing Street Fighter 5, and IDOM was making Laura work, who was not considered a high tier character, but IDOM was committed to Laura, and seeing he didn't win that year, but he got like really close fighting through the losers bracket. It was this incredible underdog story of a character that was not typically seen as very strong, you know, coming through with this pilot, you know, and like really like making this moment where everybody after that, if the game had longer longevity, I think Laura would have like become a much more popular character. But unfortunately, Street Fighter 6 is right around the corner. But that's really, I think that's such a powerful thing about fighting games that, I think especially the franchise that's like closest to my heart at present is Guilty Gear. and especially in Guilty Gear Strive, every character is kind of broken. And so when you're discussing who the best character is, it changes a lot. The meta changes a lot. And the best thing about watching an EVO Top 16 is you'll see a huge variety of characters represented, because the game is so broken and unbalanced that it wraps all the way back around to being perfectly balanced. And so when everybody's broken, nobody is broken. And so watching the community move around that and have this like this moment where it's like you see somebody last year, there was a player who was playing Chip. He's a very unpopular character. He has the lowest amount of health in the game. He's really fast, and that's like all he has going for him. But damn it, somebody made it to the top 16 playing that guy, you know, and it's very and it was for the Chip people. And I don't know. I just love that it bleeds through in like all of my interests, you know, especially like with Pokemon types, or I'm big on Magic the Gathering, where everything is sorted into colors and things. And it's just like, you know, I feel that I really like that you had an appreciation for that too. It almost makes up for your terrible Mario Odyssey opinions.
Or rather, your terrible opinions. But I feel like we've been talking a bit too much. So Lucas, like, I'd like to hear like how you were introduced to the fighting game series.
So, I haven't played a lot of fighting games. It's not really my thing. However, the first video game console that I ever bought with my own money was a GameCube, and it was at a time in my life. I must have been, I don't know, it's 11 or 12, something like that, and This was my money, right? But it was managed by my parents, right? I had to ask for permission to use it. And I said, I would like Super Smash Bros. Melee. And then it wasn't a lie. I just didn't know how untrue it was. But I said, this is the only game I'll ever need, because it has all these different characters, right? Definitely a kid way of thinking, right? And I really enjoyed Super Smash Bros. Melee. Didn't understand it, really. Right, I didn't know how to do all those awesome moves that different people. I still don't. There's not, what is it, ledge grabbing that there's you know, you like juggle an enemy or an opponent off of a ledge and keep sending them up. I don't know how to do that. I still don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do it in Ultimate. Don't know how to do it in Brawl or Melee. But Melee it was just so fun to play. It is very fast. It is very fast, obviously, which I appreciate. I did not like how slow Brawl was, even though I think Brawl was like, Brawl had like the best soundtrack, I think, in any of the Smash games. And that's what I always remember. Until
Ultimate, right?
Yeah, Ultimate is very, very good. Ultimate is very good. But
yeah, I think Ultimate is just like, it's just all the songs.
I think Brawl's theme song is like far superior.
Yeah, really iconic. Yeah.
I think. Yeah. And so that's how I was introduced to Melee. I did have Soul Calibur 2 for the Xbox.
Hell yeah. Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, hell yeah. Spawn.
Yeah, the one with Spawn. I absolutely did not understand that game. But I played it. I would always play single player. All of these, I basically only played single player. Rarely would I play. Sometimes my friends and I would play Smash Melee. But rarely would I play multiplayer. So obviously I never got good. I just played single player. I'd play through the story mode. I'd fight them online. I remember I unlocked Mewtwo in Smash Melee by playing for 100 hours, not by completing whatever. I think you had to complete like the last event challenge, something like that. It was a pretty difficult challenge. So that's how I unlocked Mewtwo, which I love Mewtwo. Mewtwo was awesome in Melee. But other than that, haven't played a lot of fighting games. There is one that I would probably peg as my favorite, just because of how unique it was. Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi, I think it was.
Oh, hell yeah.
It was it was third person. It wasn't 2D. And it was very focused on, you know, obviously they'd punch each other. It's Dragon Ball Z. But it was very focused on kind of like the long-range energy attacks. I really enjoyed that game.
it kind of had the same effect that you're talking about with Melee being like the only game you'll ever need, right? Is that, the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games had insane rosters. If you were into Dragon Ball Z, it really did feel like you would hit the absolute jackpot. Like nothing could be cooler than like you're unlocking the capsules and you're just like, more and more characters and you're like, wow, they put that guy in here,
I think in the same vein as the Naruto games. So there are Naruto fighting games that have that same Tenkaichi gameplay style of having a third person perspective. Right. You could like experience the entire series through those games, and actually, I think some people consider them the best way to experience the series because you watch through the anime of like Naruto, right? It's gonna take you forever. I did it when I was in college. It took me like 3 years to get through all of the episodes, and then same thing with Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z would probably take even longer.
Yeah.
But you could play through like 4 10-hour games and you get the whole story real nice and contained. Obviously you could read the manga, but that would also take a long time.
You're at least familiar with it. You know what happens in the series if you play through the games and all that.
I think they actually did a pretty good job of like going through the series. That's what I've heard at least. I've never played. Maybe I'll play them sometime. But
I mean, they have. I couldn't possibly advocate and say that they did a better job or anything like that. But I think as far as like understanding the concept and like understanding the characters, I think is really, really did very well because fighting games are all about the characters. Right. And so if you miss that, you've missed everything. But I do think that you can play through those and be like, yep, I know what Vegeta's deal is. I think that's very, very true.
Yeah.
But other than that, I really haven't played many fighting games. I've played games based off of fighting games. So a couple years ago, I played Grand Blue Fantasy Relink.
Yeah, Fantasy Versus.
Cool. Not the fighting game. There was like an action RPG. And it was very flashy.
Gotcha.
Very cool. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, not a lot of fighting games for me. It's just not my thing. But going back to kind of your pro wrestling and relating that to competitive, I watch fighting games. I'll watch Evo every year. And fighting games are unique because I watch a lot of esports. That's something I do. So I run every day. And a lot of days I do it on a treadmill because in where I live it's cold. I'm a wimp when it comes to cold. I'm wearing a sweatshirt right now when it's 90 something degrees out. I learn a lot when I'm watching esports. I'll watch a competitive Pokemon. I have learned so much from watching VGC. I watch competitive World of Warcraft, which I already know a lot about World of Warcraft, so I just know what's going on. Competitive League of Legends. I know nothing about, like, I've never played that game, but I got a pretty good idea of like what's happening now because I've watched it a lot. Fighting games, though, no clue, because it's just so. Like, even the tournaments, even the events that show you what their fingers are doing on, like, the game pads, oh my gosh, they're moving so fast and so much is happening, and you gotta know, like, different, like, slight animation changes, and it's incomprehensible, but it's so fun to watch. It really is super, super fun to watch because it's so hype.
Yeah, it's very hype, and it's all very quick. The way that you just seeing a single round go in somebody's favor is really exciting, I think anybody can appreciate the Evo moment that Damian was talking about, all those counters. You could acknowledge that, that was probably really hard to do,
for sure. For sure.
And this is
like that. It's something universal.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I got a question before. Actually, I'll come back to this question. Keep it in my head. Go for it, Daisy.
No, please go for your question.
Okay.
It's probably more relevant.
If both of you had to choose, what is your favorite fighting game character of any game?
I actually wanted to ask this question later, or actually generally, like, for fighting game franchises. I think it's difficult. Like, would you say play-wise or just... like,
whatever you want.
When it comes to the character and its personality.
Whatever you want.
So I would say when it comes to the character design and the personality and all of that, I really like Slayer from Guilty Gear.
Oh yeah, that's my daughter is obsessed with Slayer. I have to deal with that asshole all the time.
Yeah, he's so awesome, and I really like the how his moves look and stuff like that, but his playstyle is not what I enjoy that much.
Mm-hmm.
I think honestly, it's kind of vanilla and boring, but I've just got to go with Ryu because, I used to main Ryu when I got into Street Fighter 2 Turbo and in all other Street Fighter games, like up until Street Fighter 4. And like even when I used to play Third Strike a lot, I used to main Ryu, even though he's, technically I think the worst Shoto in that game. And Shoto, for those that don't know, that like Lucas is a style of characters, because as I kind of explained before, characters in fighting games have different play styles. Like you attack from far away, you zoning, or there's the so-called grapplers, where they tend to have more life and they can't attack you from far away that much, but when they get close to you, then they can deal a lot of damage at once. And that's something I really enjoy. So I actually used to play T-Hawk and Hugo a lot when it comes to Street Fighter 4. So I would say those four characters are the ones that, come off the top of my head when you ask the question. What about you, Daisy?
So, it's tough because first of all, I have a really hard time with picking a main in fighting games, and it's one of the reasons that I stay like damned in the category that I am, which is like too advanced to play with like friendlies with people who aren't into fighting games, but not good enough to really have satisfying online experiences. I like to jump around a lot, so picking my very favorite would be very, very difficult. But a couple that I really like a lot, I really love Jury in the Street Fighter franchise. It has nothing to do with her bare feet. I swear to God, it has nothing to do with her bare feet. But Jury in Street Fighter is very, very cool. She's like, yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, she is a very cool. She's like an evil Chun-Li, and I just love her design. I love a good dive kick. But another one is Sakura from the Street Fighter series. She's somebody who I've always been really, really drawn to. And I think part of it is that I like Shotos who are just a little weird, who are just a little off, a little bit different. And she just, I also just love her energy. She's just a cool character. She's just something that like appeals to me. But a big one, and this kind of ties to some of my big like introduction to the fighting game space, is Terry Bogard. And so Terry Bogard from City of Wolves, or from Garu, or Fatal Fury, or King of Fighters. So when I was really young, I was introduced to Street Fighter by my mom's friend who let me borrow like Street Fighter and Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, and I borrowed those games forever. And I really, really loved Street Fighter and thought it was so cool, but I did not have anyone to play with. There was no, it just didn't happen ever. I was like 4 or 5 years old. There was nobody to play with except for adults who would just whip my ass and I wouldn't learn anything. But my dad would take me to the laundromat when I was young, and we'd go there to do laundry. And I had this friend from elementary school who, for whatever reason, was almost always there on the same days that we were. And so our dads were kind of similar. They would talk to each other. Both of our dads were kind of like long hair, alternative rock dudes or whatever. And I had really long hair as a kid too. And that was always something that like, if a character had long hair in a video game, I liked them a little bit more, pretty consistently. Or if they were left-handed. I'm still chapped about Link switching hands in the Twilight Princess era. But they had this Fatal Fury arcade cabinet there, and I'd never played that before in my life. And me and this like other kid who was always at the laundromat at the same time, we would play Fatal Fury together. And it was like, that was my first exposure to like playing a fighting game with another person. And I was in a physical arcade. Well, I was in a laundromat, but I was at an arcade machine having to spend quarters, and we were, we found our favorite characters and we would play for like an hour or whatever while our dads talked about music and did laundry. And Terry was really like the guy, he was a cool long-haired dude, and he was unique because he wasn't like Ryu. And I remember finding that so interesting, is that the way that Terry played was really like, it was the first time I was exposed to the SNK fighter in the way that they did fighting games just a little bit differently. And he's still somebody, and if I have a main in Smash Brothers Ultimate, it's Terry Bogard. You know, he's somebody who's really like stuck with me. And I have this awesome t-shirt I'm not wearing right now, but it's like the Born in the USA Bruce Springsteen album cover, but it's Terry. This is Born in Southtown, USA. You know, so he was I don't know, he's somebody who's always stuck with me. So I guess that'll be my answer.
Thanks for sharing that story. Like, it's very similar to that video I talked about. You know, this, unfortunately, when I was growing up, arcades were kind of dead in Europe, or at least where I was living.
For sure. They weren't thriving here either at that time.
I can't say I have ever been to an arcade. I don't think I've ever been one.
Oh, wow. I've been to so many. I've like grown up in arcades, and we have a great one here in Albuquerque right now that's just like, it's like a full-blown Japanese one. I'm really into the arcade stuff. So, you know, get your ass to a cool arcade. Look up if you have a round one in your area. I bet you do.
I'll take a look.
Yeah.
I'm going to say my favorite, because I actually do have one, despite the fact that I like never play fighting games, but it is a very normie answer, but it's for a really specific reason. So I like Greninja in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I always pick his shiny form, but he has a move. His down A move is like a bounce. So, you know, he flies down, legs outstretched, and he'll bounce off of opponents. And I just like to bounce. I just like to bounce off of opponents. All of my friends, none of us are like super great at it, so it annoys the heck out of all of my friends on the rare occasion that we do play. I have played against a couple like actually good Smash players a couple times, and they just decimate me. It's like not a viable strategy, but it is fun. It's the one little piece of tech that you know. Tech is a strong word.
Yeah.
But something I wanted to add on to what you said, Daisy, is that what's so important is the community, to have really like real life friends that play with you, because that's the most fun thing. Because like in my experience, like we had like dynamics develop around our beefs and stuff like that.
In your own personal meta, regardless of who's on the tier list, there's somebody in your group that's broken because somebody knows something that the other people don't know how to play around yet.
Exactly. And I didn't mention it, I kind of hinted at it, but I've fell off the fighting game community. I don't play fighting games that often anymore because I just moved out, and then those friends that I had that I grew up with, they kind of ghosted me. So since then, I haven't found anyone else who would really like to play a lot of fighting games with me for hours. Like maybe some people that would like to try it out, but then they're not so interested. And I've never really met like a fighting game community over here in Europe. I don't really think it's a thing. I've heard a lot about, through YouTube, through Evo and stuff like that, that at least in California, it looks like you just go into any arcade and there's like people, it's there, the fighting game community. And I guess it must be like that, like also everywhere in the United States. But here it's kind of inaccessible, I would say.
That's kind of interesting because it's definitely not accessible around me. Like I'll look it up, but I really don't think there are any like, big arcades around me. But I have heard that Europe is more into the whole like communal gaming thing, having like gaming cafes. I've heard that Europe is bigger into that than the United States.
So first of all, I'd like to point anybody listening right now who is fighting game curious to check out our Discord, because that might be a really good place
good idea.
to pop in and maybe find somebody else to play with. I also want to point out to you, Damian, if you were to nab Guilty Gear Strive on a sale on PC, I would get you back into it. But also, so I live in New Mexico, and New Mexico isn't a terribly populous state. It's not a terribly like popular one. We don't have like a lot of population, whatever. But locally in my town, there is every single month there is a gathering of fighting game community people.
That's cool.
And really, I would say multiple times a month. And so it was all just a matter of asking the right person, finding the Discord. I would say if there's a college in your town, if there's a guarantee. If there's not, though, you might really surprise yourself, because the fighting game community is a local community. And I don't really go to these events, but I have a buddy who's big on Melee, and he goes to almost every single one. And like, you know, they'll do them at bars, they'll do them, you know, at convention halls, they'll do them wherever they possibly can. If you have a gaming center in your environment, if you have somewhere where you can just pop in and just like, you know, pay $10 an hour to play an Xbox or whatever. I see you shaking your head, but I bet Two Dens has one. You know, there's definitely like spaces like that. They hold tournaments. There is a community almost certainly near you somewhere. Now, of course, being where you're at, you know, Damian, I can't speak to that for true, because I'm not, you know, I just don't know nothing about Europe. I'm just an ignorant American. But I would say, like, I bet if you poked around, I bet you there's a subreddit or there's a Discord, or if you walked into a used game shop, or if you know, there's maybe the potential for that locally, but you'd have to want to play locally. Sure. You could just as easily hop online, you know, and have a great time with any Discord that you could find about video fighting games.
Quick note on that. For sure. Quick note on that. So I live in the town that I went to college. And when I was in college, this didn't exist, but we occasionally will like go on walks, right? And we'll walk through the buildings, because we're alumni. We can do what we want. I gave that place enough money.
Right.
And they have a competitive like esports like facility now. They have an esports facility. Yep. And I'm thinking, like, I went to college there 10 years ago. If this had been there, I would totally have done this. Like, I would have totally done this. Yeah. But they have like these. You're right. So I wasn't thinking of it because it's like an actual esports thing. That's what they use it for. But they do. You know, they've got Melee, they've got Ultimate, they got League of Legends, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I mean, college. I wonder if they have any public events. Maybe I'll look that up. But
there's a really good chance.
Yeah.
It's very different here in Europe.
Yeah.
I think gaming, especially also in college and in general, I don't think it's so mainstream. At least like these gaming communities. I think, you know, fighting games, especially for like parties and stuff like that, you know, it's definitely a thing. I think a lot of people play video games, but these like mainstream communities, not only for the fighting game community, but also for gaming in general, I'm not as aware of that. Like, I've met a lot of other gamers where I live, but not really people that are interested in playing fighting games or, you know, like bonding so much over the common love for a video game.
Well, if you are a European and you are watching this YouTube video, please share in the comment section below if there's a community that you know about. If you can connect Damian with fellow FGC degenerates.
And maybe we can make one of our own in our Discord at some point. That sounds like
absolutely
it could be fun.
And I want to give you another solution, Damian.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a child and then raise them to be interested in fighting games. And then you'll always have somebody to play with, because this is my very cute story that I wanted to share today, is that, you know, my daughter has always been really fascinated. And my daughter's gateway was Super Smash Brothers Easy, you know, and then that bled into Street Fighter. And they've got this great, like, Street Fighter, every character in Street Fighter handbook, you know, and that they literally, the thing is in shreds because they've just read it over and over and over and over again. And then when they're almost 13 right now, which is insane. I can't believe I just said that out loud, but are they almost 12? They're almost 13. Anyway, so they're aging rapidly, but they got really into Guilty Gear. And they found Guilty Gear music, which especially in Strive is like peak. It's like so good because there's like lyrics and themes and motifs. It's such an excellent soundtrack that they got really into it and they wanted to play with me. And so starting a few years ago, we started playing Guilty Gear together. And it's exactly what you were talking about, Damian, about how you would have your own meta and your own like rivalries or whatever. For me, when I play fighting games, I have a few friends who will play Street Fighter with me, but mostly I play Guilty Gear, and mostly I play Guilty Gear with my 12-year-old daughter. And we are consistently around equal skill level. And it's such like a privilege, because like I was saying, you know, I'm not quite good enough to really have a great time online, you know, and I'm a little too advanced to know just a little bit too much about fighting games in general, to where like if a friend comes over and they're willing to sit and play with me, I either have to like teach them for hours or they're like, oh, don't go easy on me, and then I just win, and it's just, and nobody's really having fun. But my daughter knows just as much as I do. And so when we play together, we are constantly like, one of us will be on this crazy win streak because we're doing something that the other player doesn't know how to counter, and then they figure it out. And then now the other player is on this crazy win streak, and we're just trading wins the whole time. And it's always ultra satisfying because there's just one other human being in the world who has exactly the same amount of experience with this as I do. And that's like a really, really special thing. And, I don't know, if you're not ready to have kids yet and you're not ready for like the 10-year plus investment that it takes to get them there, I understand. I'm not trying to pressure you and push you. But I know Tudens, you've got a little kiddo right now. I'm sure. Have you already put a controller in their hands? I know they have a Pokemon collection.
Listen, I have never liked racing games. I have never cared for Mario Kart. And I have played a lot of Mario Kart World because my son loves the cow riding on the bike. And it is so much fun. It is so much fun.
You get Chad.
So it's something that I really look forward to as he gets older. Playing and seeing what games he ends up liking, and then certainly learning those. So who knows? Maybe someday I'll be just as good as those Evo folks. Probably not.
Oh, I can't wait. It is for real, like such an exciting thing. Like my daughter is really into Deltarune and like Undertale and all that stuff, which I'm interested in, but probably wouldn't be playing myself. But like I get to share in that interest, and I get to know everything that's going on there, and it's just so much fun to share that. Or there are certain games that they really love to watch that they're like, she really likes Doom, and she doesn't want to play Doom because Doom looks hard. But, when Doom Dark Ages came out, that was us, together the whole time playing through that whole game. And it's just, those moments are so cool. And there's a fun one that's a little bit closer to where your child is at. And I know this is still pretty off, but when it came time to learn to read, right, my daughter was struggling a lot. And she really wanted to play video games. And, the whole thing was that most video games you're going to need to be able to read.
Right.
And so what we did is we sat down and we played through Paper Mario Color Splash together. And what we did was we assigned characters. So my son would read a character, and I would read a character, and my daughter would be in charge of reading characters. And we would just be very, very patient with that. And by the end of this video game, which did take us a lot longer to beat because of our strategy here, by the time we were done, my daughter, who was a first grader, had like a middle school reading level because that was relatively like the reading level that the game was written at.
I'm just gonna make a real quick comment. Just as a teacher, that is a 10 out of 10 story. That makes me so happy to hear.
No, it was the right move, and it just bonded us over something that we all really loved. And also, that game's hilarious. Straight up, that game is, all the Paper Mario games are funny, but Color Splash in particular has a really, really great script. And so it was just this beautiful like year of just like laughing and having fun and bonding over video games. And like, it's I think something I really appreciate about you two, is that our approach to this podcast has always been, it's not just about games for game's sake. It's about the fact that games are art, they are expression, and they are something that affect you and impact your life. And, we have all three of us have only been alive while video games have also been happening.
Yeah.
And so there is a bit of a generational disconnect if you go a little bit further back, but it's like talking about a life without video games is like talking about a life without television or without books, so the way
absolutely.
that, absolutely. And we've lived through all of these controversies about like our game's art or what signifies or what is, we've seen watershed moments like Mario Galaxy or like The Last of Us or these things where, or BioShock, where, they really started to challenge the mainstream interpretation of what qualifies as like artistic or expression. But really, we always get to talk about like what they mean to us and what they by extension mean to our families and to our friends. And it's just like I don't know, I just got warm fuzzies there because I think it's really, really important and really significant. And those are always my favorite content creators, or people who want to talk about video games in a meaningful way, that doesn't wear kid gloves and really talks about them for what they are, because they can be teaching aids. They can be.
I personally think that video games are currently the ultimate form of of media. I think they're the ultimate form of expression and art. Obviously, they're super expensive to make. They take forever, right? And there's so many ways you can express yourself. But video games have an interactivity that nothing else has. You can interpret.
Yeah.
You can read and interpret a book. You can write about books. You can watch and interpret a movie. You can write about movies, right? You can express your opinion of them, but ultimately you're basing it off of what the author or the director or whoever set. And the same thing is for like art and all this other, like physical art, print art, digital art. But when it comes to video games, you as the player have a lot of input depending on the game, right? But and that absolutely has a role in how you're able to interpret and express yourself through it. And nothing comes close as video games. And I don't know what could.
Yeah. When it comes to education, something I also wanted to add is that I learned English by playing video games, because in Greece, the video games aren't translated or dubbed, so everything is in English. So imagine being like 5 or 6 years old, and if you want to play video games, it has to be in an entirely different language that you don't understand.
Right.
And so you're just kind of forced to learn that language by just spending lots of hours by playing video games. And I also learned math by playing Yu-Gi-Oh, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably like one of the first generations that might be educated through like media like that. But I think it's like, for me, like I was diagnosed with ADHD like when I was a student. And I think like I actually never studied for most of my life. I used to be like the worst student in class. And in the end, I think the biggest reason why I was able to be a good student at the end and go to med school was because of, video games, I would say.
And,
I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah, definitely. And one more thing before we move on to the end of the show. You say that Paper Mario might be a little bit beyond him. My son's first experience with video game was God of War Ragnarok, as he was like 2 months old, and I played it with him in my arms.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Which of course goes back to views on how does violence really affect kids. I mean, he's 2 months old, couldn't even understand that something was happening on the screen. He was just like, but
they're essentially having like a psychedelic trip for the first like 6 months of life.
Right. So, but I don't know. I just think video games, especially with kids now, and how they're going to develop with them. I think they're the ultimate form of expression. I just think they are.
Anyways. I'll tell you, very similar to that story. When my son was born, when my firstborn, Red Dead Redemption 1 had just come out, and that was like, it was like my Father's Day gift that year from my partner at the time, and I was a stay-at-home parent, and so I was like exactly what you're saying. I had my baby in my arms, and I was playing this like incredibly moving piece about like fatherhood and responsibility, and like, oh yeah, changed me forever.
Oh, for sure.
So, and I killed a lot of men. I shot a lot of men in the head with guns while holding my baby in my arms. So, we're all roughly on the same page there.
Anyways, as we head into the later part of the show, I want to ask both of you, what have you guys been up to lately? Anything new, interesting in your lives, or content creation that you'd like to talk about? Why don't we start with Daisy?
Yeah. So, my life has been pretty rocking lately. Nothing super crazy. Some really neat highlights that are definitely video game adjacent are recently the Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy set came out. And that is, I play a lot of Magic. It's something that I do pretty much every other week. I have friends over and we all play Commander together. And so while I have some gripes about the set, what it's really done is just make me incredibly excited about Final Fantasy again. So my last couple weeks have been a lot of, I've reinstalled Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy IX, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And I'd never finished Rebirth, so I'm kind of like trucking through that. And I'm very, very close to the end now. I'm sure I'm still like 20 hours away, but I'm very close to the end. And I got to share with my kids Final Fantasy X and IX, which are my very favorite entries.
Best estimate without spoiling it for anyone. Where are you in Rebirth?
I'm about to return to the Golden Saucer for the second time.
You have like
after Nibelheim.
You have like 30 hours left, like 30
Jesus
hours
Christ.
left. Yeah, and obviously 10
we'll
and
see
9,
how much.
Amazing games.
Yeah. So I mean, 10 and 9 are my favorites, and so it's been really, really good sharing that with my kids, and the cards are great. I don't know, how anybody here feels about that game, but the flavor of the Final Fantasy cards is like super, super on point. They added, they added enchantment creature summons, so they're like sagas, but they eventually leave, and it's so good. It's just so well done, and I'm very blessed in that I have a friend who is the biggest Magic the Gathering degenerate I know, and she came over with a box of like Final Fantasy, and she already had almost every card. We were just pulling for a couple rares, and so I just got to keep like a whole box, including like a bunch of rares and stuff, and it was really like really, really fun. This is something I was really looking forward to all year. When they announced the Final Fantasy set, it was a couple years ago, and so it's been on my radar. And then it got really expensive, which sucks. But I was able to find the decks I wanted for good prices. So that's been like, I've had a very Final Fantasy themed summer, and I'm gonna see how close I can get to the end of Rebirth before Death Stranding comes out in a couple days, because that's going to eat up my life for a little while.
I didn't even realize Death Stranding 2 was coming out in a couple days. I did not have any Magic cards at all until about 2 weeks ago, and now I have quite a few. Got some. I have a
congratulations!
Very nice Aerith card. I have a very nice Aerith card. I have almost all of the Final Fantasy VII crew. I just need Kate Sith.
Very cool.
I have been into the Final Fantasy Magic.
Rad. Very cool.
All right, Damian, what's up with you?
Yeah, me, I haven't gotten, I've been pretty busy lately, so I haven't been playing a lot. Still playing through Red Dead Redemption, the first one, on the Switch. And I also played a bit of ActRaiser. Do you know this game?
I've heard of it.
On the SNES?
You're playing the SNES one, or are you playing the Switch remake?
No, the SNES one, actually.
Cool.
So
I've never played it, but I'm familiar.
I think it's like really cool and very interesting because it blends like the typical like SNES era side-scrolling platformer, blah, 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 kind of like a Castlevania, but then you have like you're actually the god of this universe, and you have your people that pray to you and sacrifice things, and you kind of have to help them flourish, their community, and grow. And so there's like demons, and it's like a top-down kind of Sims-like perspective, and then you have to help them build their town and, colonize other, parts. And yeah, I think it's like still like super interesting as a concept. I can really recommend, for people that like side-scrollers and retro games especially. And the last thing, I was reminded of this when we talked about like Mortal Kombat, where you rip out the head with a spine. I watched yesterday a movie, a horror film, obviously. It's called 28 Years Later. Have you heard about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
No, I can't say I've seen it either.
Yeah, because it's kind of like a thing. It's not really a spoiler, but there's like a character, I guess, who tends to do exactly the same fatality as, I don't even remember who that does. Like, I think Sub-Zero does. No, I don't know actually. Who pulls out the head with a spine? I don't remember.
That's funny, but I couldn't tell you either. I've played like every Mortal Kombat game, and it just feels like something that everybody does, but I'm sure it's not.
Yeah, kind of. Maybe it's everybody. But
right.
I think that, like the editing is kind of all over the place, and there's a lot of plot holes, but it can definitely be enjoyable, especially if you've seen the other ones. So how about you, Lucas? And I wanted to say, also, maybe you can also say what your favorite fighting game is. Is it Melee? And then maybe you can also tell me,
It's
Daisy.
definitely Melee. I don't think there'd be any game that could compare. It's not something I've thought like a ton about, but it is definitely Melee.
It's the ultimate game. It's the last game you ever need.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I definitely did not buy any other many GameCube games of varying different genres after that. Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, that was it.
What about you, Daisy?
Oh, favorite fighting game. Wow, for some reason I wasn't thinking you were going to ask me. Yeah, it's way too hard for me to like decide what my very favorite one is. I think in all practicality, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is definitely the one that I have played the most for sure. Like that's been my go-to. My personal hypest moments are in that. But you know, I think these. I'm gonna have to put Guilty Gear Strive there if I'm pressured, just because it's a learnable Guilty Gear. It's a beautifully balanced Guilty Gear. It is so incredible with its presentation and its characters. And queer rep, by the way, you know, LGBT rep means a lot to me, and Guilty Gear does that better than any other video game franchise in the world by like a country mile. And it's something that I get to bond with my kids over. So like, you know,
Very cool.
I'd have to be some sort of asshole to pick anything else.
Cool. For me, it has to be Street Fighter 4 Ultra, because I've just spent the most time.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily, when it comes to like the presentation and the vibes, I think like Third Strike is amazing, like the music, the atmosphere, you know, the graphics, the animations. But I don't know, like the mechanics and the roster of Ultra Street Fighter 4, I think it's the most I have enjoyed any fighting game so far. But yeah,
and Street Fighter 4 really clicked with me too, and you know I relate to that game a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry, bouncing back. What I've been up to, I have been continuing to play Pokemon Blue, which has been an interesting experience. Obviously, it's really old. I love the game, but man, I think I could really argue in defense of like the XP share now, because there are some Blue takes a while. It's a grindy game, and then but most of the time I've been editing a video that should be coming out in about a week from this recording. By the time this is posted on YouTube, it'll have been out for a long time. Been working really hard on this video. I'm excited about it. It has taught me a lot about writing scripts specifically. It's interesting because early in the video, I would say the later part of the video is a lot stronger than the early part of the video, which is just the way it is in this particular script. But hopefully in the future I'll be able to account for that. But the way that I structured the script, I love this structure because I basically laid out like what transition I'm going to do, what music goes where. So it has actually been, despite the fact that it is over an hour-long video, it's been a relatively quick editing process. I've only been at it for like a week and a half-ish, probably like 12 to 15 hours of editing, which is not a lot for that big of a video for me. So I'm excited about how cohesive it is.
Great.
Just
came together naturally.
Yes, just excited about that.
Awesome.
And so all we have left for today are our loot drops. Damian, do you have one ready at this point?
Yeah, I have multiple ready. So the first one I kind of hinted at already is the video by Happy Console Gamer, where he tells how he got into Street Fighter 2, what it used to be like back in the early to mid 90s to be into fighting games and fight it out with others in the arcade, what ultimately inspired me to get into the FGC and into fighting games as a whole. And if you've gotten interested and you don't know that much about fighting games, I can really recommend you the channel of Maximilian Dude. Do you guys know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that guy.
Yeah. He also introduced me, to a big extent to Third Strike, because he used to play that a lot back then. I don't watch his videos that often anymore, but yeah, I think it's also a great introduction to fighting games. And yeah, last but not least, a series of videos, like fighting game related, are the adventures of Gutex and Mike Ross. Have you guys ever heard about that? Yeah, it's two fighting game players. They used to be like quite competitive in the Third Strike, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and Street Fighter 4 scene. Gutex is one guy, and the other one is Mike Ross, who used to also work for Twitch for a show he was doing, like for like a partnership between Capcom and Twitch that was like fighting game related. And I think it's called Capcom Pro Talk. It's definitely not a thing anymore. But yeah, they did a series where they play online, and it had a really, really good production quality, and it's super engaging. And they also had guests like other guys from the FGC. And yeah, it's, I think, really, really enjoyable to watch. Like on the Sundays, I would, when I was having breakfast with cereal, I would just watch that, and it used to be like a whole routine for me. I can really recommend it to check it out. Yeah. So how about you guys?
Very cool.
I can go next. I obviously, not being super into fighting games, I don't really have a someone related to fighting games that I'm going to recommend. So instead, I'm going to recommend both a book and a YouTube channel that are both related. If you've ever heard of XKCD's What If, it's a book, and then there's a YouTube channel based on that book where basically the author goes through and answers a bunch of very random what if questions. I love the one, what if you took all the oceans and put them on Mars? There's like, what if every laser in the world was shot at the moon? Just silly little questions that actually end up having really interesting physics-based answers. And they have the videos have fun little animations that go along with them. And then the book is great too. Really like it. Daisy?
That's rad. I was familiar with the book. I did not know that there was a YouTube channel. I'll have to check that out. So mine, these are very fighting game related. I have two of them because I couldn't bring myself to leave either out. First of all, if you are curious about fighting games from a historical perspective and would like to be entertained by a very good anime series, please go watch High Score Girl. High Score Girl is available on Netflix. It is so well written. It is a very cute, like, romance story, more or less. But it is so deeply, like, entrenched in the history, the very rich history of Capcom and SNK fighters, that, like, it's so good. It's so enjoyable. It gives you a very strong feeling for what it was like to be part of the arcade culture in Japan in the 1990s during the heyday. It follows a certain timeline, so you're there when, like, Street Fighter, Turbo comes out, things like that. And it's also just a really sweet, really cute story. And so really that's for both of you, and that is also for the viewer right now. High Score Girl is such a good, fun, easy breezy anime that will just crash course you through so much of the fighting game stuff without ever losing the entertainment value. Second, I watch a lot of fighting game YouTubers, but today I really want to shout out Guile Win Quote. Guile Win Quote. Yes, he's one of the smaller ones, I would say, but his passion bleeds through everything that he does, and he very specifically likes to talk about games that nobody else talks about. He very specifically will go into, like, obscure, weird ones, and really give a very fair and interested analysis as to, like, what made certain fighting games flop or hated or whatever. And you'll talk about weird ports, things like that. And his content is very digestible. It's never too long, never goes too far. And you know what? The man's voice, it's just soothing. It's just nice. Yeah. So, all fighting games are great is the philosophy of that channel. So those are my two. Please check them out. Yeah. Shout out to Guile Win Quote.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, watching, however you consumed this media. If you would like to interact with us more, you can please go to our Discord. There will be a link in the description, and there will also be a QR code at the end of this episode. Thanks, everybody. Daisy, Damian, thank you very much. Uh-oh.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.